You're watching Mint Wide Angle and I am Anindya Chakravarti. Now, most of us, especially middle class people like you and me, we have started implementing subtle changes in our lives to keep the coronavirus away from us, which means washing our hands regularly, using a hand sanitizer whenever we can when we can't wash our hands. And many of us have made several drastic changes as well. We're trying to work from home if it's possible. Our kids are sitting right near us all the time because the schools are shut. So even the more pious amongst us, not me, but even the more pious who don't like to give screen time to the children, I'm sure you've given in by now and you're allowing them to watch much more TV than you would normally have just to get them out of your hair. But that's something that we middle class people can do. What about India's poor? Can they afford to do all these things? Firstly, they don't have enough running water. If you look at it, most slums in India's cities, there's no piped water being supplied to most people. Take Delhi for instance. A 2016 USAID study tells us that about half, 49% of people who live in slums do not have regular water. Things might have improved by now, but not enough to make a real change. In 2016, for instance, the survey tells us in most slums, 30-odd families would come to a single community tap, collect water from there, store it in buckets, and use that water for the entire day. About 30% of people who live in slums have to spend at least 1 hour to collect water, and sometimes that goes up to 3 hours a day. So for most people living in slums, washing hands constantly, regularly is simply out of the question. They just don't have that much water. Take the case of working from home, which is the second point. Can they do that? Now think about it, that only 23% of people working in India actually have regular salaried jobs. And the remaining 77% are either self-employed or they're on daily wages, like the laborers that you see on construction sites. Among the self-employed, a large bulk are actually people who earn between 8 to 10,000 rupees a month, which is your plumber, the electrician, the carpenter, the painter, your local sabzi wala, the thela wala near you, the press wala to who you give your clothes to be ironed. They are all people who are called self-employed, but they have to work every single day to be able to earn enough to eat their daily meal. So these people simply cannot afford to sit at home and be quarantined or even self-isolate themselves. What about the remaining 23% who have regular salaried jobs? Well, let me tell you, government data tells us that 45% of these people do not get paid leave. They do not have medical leave. So if they don't turn up at work, they could be the peon in a small office, it could be a driver, it could be a household maid, it could be many such professions, waiters, people working in dhabas who do not have paid or medical leave. More importantly, unlike white-collar workers who can actually do much of their work on phones, laptops, on video conferences, teleconferences, video chats, email, these people cannot do it. Just imagine, you call up a plumber and can they fix your tap online? You could say, yes, I could do it if they instruct me, but that you could do off a YouTube video. Why would you pay a plumber to do that? Similarly, an Uber driver cannot move you from one place to another unless it's some sort of a Uber video game in which you're moving in cyberspace. So these people have to go out and work to be able to earn a living unless they're given paid leave. The third thing, keeping kids at home. Now, you know that when even our kids have to stay at home, our entire day, our entire work life is disrupted. But we somehow work it out, and if we can work from home or take paid leave, we will tide over this short period of time. But what happens to these people who have to go out to work? If they leave their kids at home in the slums, those kids would normally go out and play with other kids. That's what happens when there's school breaks, right? And people still have to go to work. But right now the issue is of isolation, social distancing. So the kids can't go out, which means they cannot be left at home unless a parent is there as well. Talk about midday meals. Now, we know a lot of people in the slums, poor people, actually send their kids to school because there's that incentive of a midday meal. They send the child, one meal is taken care of. And now they have to cater to that extra meal at home. That's additional work, additional expense. Finally, the fourth point, that of social distancing. Is that possible in our slums? I mean, WHO tells you that you have to maintain a 6-foot distance between you and the next person to avoid catching the coronavirus. In slums, that is probably the size of a room in which an entire family stays. 6-foot distance that you can't even maintain with your next door neighbor. So it's absolutely impossible to implement social distancing in India's slums and tenement quarters. So what can the central government and state governments do to solve this problem? For starters, let's take the case of water. Water cannot be supplied. So the first thing that they have to do is they have to procure hand sanitizers and doctor spirit in bulk and deliver it from home to home so that people have hand sanitizers. Nothing fancy, in large bottles. They don't need to be scented, they don't need to be colored, they just need to be effective so that the poor who live in slums can keep their hands clean, can clean the viruses off their hands even if they don't have access to running water. Number two, most people do not have paid leave. The government has to give them money to keep them at home. So let's just imagine that if the government says that, okay, for the next 4 weeks, you can stay at home if you're in a coronavirus infected area, and we will put 10,000 rupees into your Jan Dhan account. Now think about it. 1% of India's population in terms of households, per household paid 10,000 rupees, that's just 3,000 crore. 5% of households, that's just 15,000 crore. It's not a lot of money, it's just 0.07% of India's GDP. By the way, if people are paid to stay at home, then that kind of solves the problem of keeping kids at home because schools are shut, children are at home. Then comes the third point, which is connected to this, which is midday meals. Families cannot afford to pay for another meal which the child would have otherwise got in school. So what can you do? You can deliver midday meals to people's home. The Delhi government has started doorstep ration delivery. They can actually tweak it a little bit and deliver midday meals. The Kerala government is already doing it. So they're giving packages to people who depend on midday meals for kids, and it contains rice, pulses, bananas, vegetables, milk and eggs, and there's plan to supply more fruits in them. They're sent to families which send their kids to school for the midday meals, and it's not going to cost dramatically extra because money is already allocated to midday meals. All that here governments have to do is to pay for the delivery mechanism. And finally, the most difficult part, which is the issue of social distancing. As I said, the slums, people live cheek by jowl right next to each other, families in a single room. If one person gets it, it's impossible for the coronavirus to not spread in an entire cluster. So what do governments have to do? They have to proactively test, find people who, if they're showing any symptoms, find out if they're positive for COVID-19, pick them up along with their families and move them to isolation camps. These can be set up in empty buildings where no one lives, and also in stadiums. China did it. China built entire isolation camps in stadiums. And state governments have to supply food, water, medical supplies and all facilities to families there. Now, this might sound to you to be straight out of some dystopian show on Netflix or Prime Video, testing people probably against their will, picking them up and putting them in isolation camps. But really, right now, there is no other option, because if the coronavirus is not stopped like this, then actually it will simply go viral.